Hi, this is Stuart Talley. I'm the partner here responsible for the hip litigation, and the reason I'm doing this video today is to provide an update on the ongoing Pinnacle metal-on-metal hip trial that is currently taking place today in Dallas, Texas. This is a case, as you may know, it involves 5 separate plaintiffs. It involves the DePuy Pinnacle metal-on-metal hips. All 5 plaintiffs allege that they were injured as a result of metal debris that was being released from these metal-on-metal hips. So today, the plaintiffs called the former CEO of DePuy to the stand, a man named Andrew Ekdahl. Mr. Ekdahl started at DePuy the very beginning of his career, has a long history of being in sales and marketing. And eventually worked his way up to becoming CEO of this company. There was a big emphasis on the cross-examination of Mr. Ekdahl about his marketing background and how someone who had a marketing background was running this company as opposed to somebody with an orthopedic or scientific background. One of the things that took up a lot of the day was cross-examination concerning memos from 1995. And the story that's being told through this trial is that in 1995, DePuy became aware that other manufacturers of hips were coming out with other, what we call bearing surfaces. So at this point in time, most hips were made out of metal and plastic, so plastic liners with a metal ball. There was a push in the industry to come out with metal-on-metal hips. And so DePuy in 1995 got its lead scientists together to look at these other bearing surfaces. There is a long, detailed memo that was prepared by DePuy's sort of head of science, where he describes the different bearing surfaces for hips. And he concludes that metal-on-metal has a history of not being a very good bearing surface for hips. He talks about how back in the 60s and 70s, manufacturers came out with metal-on-metal hips, and there were lots of problems with metal wear debris. In this memo, he talks about how the failure rate of these hips was much higher than metal-on-plastic, how the metal-on-metal hips were leaching cobalt and chromium, and how toxic and poisonous those metals can be compared to hips that have plastic debris. Hips that shed plastic debris typically do not cause a lot of problems compared to the metal debris. In the memo, the head scientist at DePuy also says it really, from a standpoint of innovation, makes more sense to come out with a better plastic and modify our metal-on-plastic designs than it does to go to this metal-on-metal design that has been shown to fail in the past. For some reason, the advice of DePuy's head of science did not carry the day. DePuy eventually went into the metal-on-metal market with the DePuy Pinnacle and then eventually the DePuy ASR, which is a hip that was recalled. Now, interesting, in the cross-examination, there was also discussion about a meeting that took place with several doctors that DePuy had hired to come in and talk about these different bearing surfaces. And there are minutes of this meeting, and this is back in 1995. And what's really interesting and what the plaintiff's attorneys talk a lot about is how in 1995, the doctors who were consulting with DePuy indicated that a metal-on-metal design could potentially lead to litigation. So there was this knowledge back in 1995 that metal-on-metal hips had failed in the past, that their failure rate was bad, that the danger from a metal-on-metal hip and the debris was much different and much more dangerous for the patients than the metal-on-plastic designs. But for some reason, all of this advice was ignored back in 1995, and DePuy went ahead with its metal-on-metal hip designs. And apparently it was to get market share. That's what it was all about. Now there was also discussion at the trial with Mr. Ekdahl about the marketing and the way DePuy marketed its hips. And one of the things they did was they spent a lot of money on surgeons to go to dinners, to go to conferences, to talk about the benefits of metal-on-metal hips. Millions of dollars was spent on that. And the plaintiff's attorney went through some of the financial records and the budgets, and it turns out that DePuy was actually spending more money on marketing and advertising than it was on research and development during this time period. So there was a big push to get market share. The other thing that was brought out today in trial was that the doctors, the ones who were flying all over the country, paid millions of dollars to talk about how great metal-on-metal hips were, stopped using those hips almost within years, a year or two after they started. So there were some doctors who only used it for 2 years. They saw the problems with the hip and they stopped using it. Despite that, DePuy continued selling these pinnacles, metal-on-metal pinnacles, to the public. Now, at the end of the day, there was also a lot of discussion about the way the DePuy Pinnacle metal-on-metal hips were approved by the FDA. The defendants like to make a big deal of the fact that it was approved by the FDA, so it must be a good product. What came out at trial was that this hip was approved through what's generally referred to as a loophole in the FDA process. It was approved through something called the 510K process, which is a process where you can go to the FDA with a product and tell the FDA that this is a product like something you've sold before, that something else that was approved, and it's substantially similar to that. It just has a minor modification. And that's how this hip was approved. They submitted something to the FDA. They said they made a minor change to a hip that was already on the market, and it should be approved. FDA rubber stamped it. So there was no testing. There was no clinical test. There was nothing submitted to the FDA to prove that the device was safe and effective. Instead, all they had to prove was that it was substantially similar to something else that was already on the market. The problem is that the device that it was substantially similar to is a device that was pulled from the market eventually because of problems with metal wear debris. So this device that they got approved, they said it was substantially similar to something on the market. That was something that was also proven to be defective. And that device came onto the market because it was shown to be substantially similar to these hips back in the 60s and 70s that were also pulled from the market. So the plaintiff's attorney did a great job sort of laying out the chain of devices that get you to the pinnacle. And what it showed was that all of these devices have failed. They failed back in the 60s and 70s, they failed in the early 2000s, and they failed at the end of 2010. So that was sort of how the testimony ended today. I think it was definitely a good day for the plaintiffs. The defense has yet to go, but there was really some damaging documents that were presented. These 1995 memos were very good for the plaintiffs. And they support the fact that DePuy really knew there were problems with these metal-on-metal hip designs before they released this thing to the market. So stay tuned. We'll try to get some more videos up. If you have any questions or concerns about the case, or you have a metal-on-metal hip and you want to ask some questions, feel free to give us a call. You can reach us at the phone number on the screen or visit our website and fill out one of our online forms.